Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Paul Smith and I's, Michael Iannini's newscast about news through the lens of the boardroom. Um, from what we're seeing in the news, in terms of our last newscast talking about those things boards need to be prepared for 2019, and some more of the other articles I'm looking at just in the last couple of weeks, it's really talking about progressive politics. It's interesting, Paul, the reason why I want to continue having this discussion is because it occurred to me the other day that when we actually look at the relationship between management and the board, it's not only about defining the roles and balancing the roles, but one of those balancing aspects is, there should be newscasts out there for management that says, hey, what are the technologies or what are the pedagogies or what's going on in learning outside of education that we can bring into education, and management should be tracking that. But governance is about protecting management so they can actualize those plans to improve student learning. So when we look at progressive politics, I'm taking a whole different look at this now, and I'm actually beginning to think about it as governance's job to protect management and be able to track and foresee potential obstacles or changes, whether it be demographics, policies, or what have you, that could impact how the school operates and the plans that management are making. When I look at this Forbes article about why progressive politics matter to corporate governance, is because they're tracking things like in the U.S. called the Green New Deal. What to say if the government decided to enact policies that said all buildings need to be carbon neutral? Well, for a school to do that is going to take a big hit in its budget. And what if management design tech center? Well, what do you think is going to take precedence? Government policy or management's desire to improve student learning? What's your take on this?
I agree with you. And again, I think a lot of people think that politics is sort of the stuff that's up there or affecting corporate. And I think it's a great example. There's so many more examples of where politics can be affecting schools. And I think we touched on it in previous newscasts. We sort of talked about how quickly policies seem to be changing and parties seem to be reacting, and you've got more populist stuff. And again, the knockdown effect of that on schools in terms of, the shifting winds, I suppose you could say, can be phenomenal. And, it could be just simply a ban on something, or as you said, a policy around buildings. There could be a new law enacted. And some of these could be time consuming, but some of them could be very costly. And again, for these schools that are running hot, trying to find, especially the sort of like private schools, trying to, their job is to bring in students, etc. But I also think about, like, one of the biggest things I think is impacting schools in sort of my region is the immigration argument that's happening within the politics side of things. And again, that's where there's a fight between the conservative side of politics and the progressive side of politics, where the conservative side want to stop the flow. And the knock-on effect of that is that countries like Australia rely heavily on international students. They've got the money, the ones coming from China, the ones coming from India, and they rely heavily on those ones coming through. So, and whilst they tend to be happy about that, the conservative side, they also want to stem the flow of the immigration side of things. And that's actually having a knock-on effect of drying up the international students. There are plenty of other places they can go that's not Australia or New Zealand, because New Zealand are also doing the same thing with different rhetoric, but essentially doing the same thing. The New Zealand thing is about controlling property prices, where in Australia it's just it's about terrorism or something, whatever it happens to be about, whatever their thing is. But essentially, the knock-on effect is huge. It said it could be buildings, it could be student numbers. So again, keeping an eye on this and understanding where the zeitgeist is going, but also, like, especially seeing this, especially in many Western democracies, it seems to be 50-50 between one side and the other, and they just seem to flip between the two quite heavily. It's like, how do you even predict what might happen?
Yeah. So I mean, like, if I were to envision what this might look like in, in a poorly governed organization, what it would look like in a well-governed organization, I can imagine in a poorly governed organization, management approaches governors to say, hey, we're having enrollment issues because the government has enacted these policies, limiting our number of student visas that we've been relying on. So this is like a boarding school instance.
Mm.
Or perhaps because in a China instance where the government really controls tightly who can go to an international school, they decide to enact one more level that students have to pass in order to get into an international school. And that's basically, if you were a native born Chinese, regardless if you're holding another passport, you cannot go to a international school. And that's not far from reality and happening.
Mm.
And if management goes to the board that says, hey, our numbers are down because of this, that's poor governance. Governance should have been tracking those policies as opposed to waiting for management to report to it.
Yeah.
They should have been tracking those policies and envisioning how they're going to affect the school and how they could be tracking it, especially in a country like, say, China, where it's not transparent about policies. They could be looking historically at other policies the Chinese government has enacted and then begin thinking to themselves, well, what can they do next?
Mm.
And if the board is not asking those questions, then the board is not preparing management and shielding them so that they can actually focus on improving student learning. So
One
it's
of
not just a
the
matter of tracking news, it's also trying to think about what could pop up in the news.
Yeah, I think one of the best mechanisms that boards can use is the risk register. And again, I think it's something we've mentioned a few times in previous webinars and newscasts on our YouTube channel and through our LinkedIn group, School Governance Network, is that the risk register is this important document for the board. It's about identifying risks, whether they're intrinsic or extrinsic, assigning a probability score, an impact score, and also like what would it take in terms of resources, time, to actually remedy or mitigate or at least react to these. And again, these are just other external risks to the school. And it's up to the board to be identifying these things, and it's up to the board and then management to actually say, okay, what do we need to do to help mitigate or adjust or be ready, even if these things don't happen, and it happens all over the place, in just as a side thing, like in Australia at the moment, massive financial services changes going on and have been for a long time, not just because of the sort of investigation into bad behavior by banks and superannuation funds, but also just trying to clean up the market, because a lot of people have way too much than they need and they're doubling up on fees. And whilst a lot of these policies that are put out there might not get enacted, most superannuation funds, pension funds, banks are actually accounting for them actually happening. And again, that's the thing. You sort of have to just weigh up the fact, like, do you think these policies will come through? What these policies, in China, as you say, you don't know what the policies might be. So you're sort of like, where is the thing going? And you might have to bring in people to assist you with that, like, political experts or social experts, in terms of like, where could things be going which could really impact on our ability to run our school effectively and do what we're supposed to do, which is churn out amazing kids.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting too, because in this Forbes article, I'm going to quote you one of the lines here, is that when you talk about given the passage of time, this is what it says: given the passage of time and changed circumstances, some crazy ideas actually tend to stick. So right now in America, they're talking about this Green New Deal being completely mad, right? But it is something that's been talked about in the past. It's something that's coming back, strong now. Some things in this could stick. And in Forbes, what they noticed, they identified 4 areas that potentially have stickiness: social and environmental. So existing buildings in the country trying to be more carbon efficient. Healthy food. I mean, come on, kids and healthy food. That's an argument that's been going on for decades about how to improve the diet of children within our schools. Transportation systems. Imagine being told, well, hey, you know what? Now you need to change your bus fleets. Now you need to go with electric or whatever else is out there, natural gas. That's going to be a huge hit on your budget. healthcare, accountability within the corporations. Maybe now, the government says, well, hey, we're really worried about student performance and the role that governance has in it. So now we're going to have all these other reporting mechanisms that you as governors now need to submit to. Or, here's another one that Forbes identified: rebalancing of wealth. And, I remember growing up as a kid and going to school, that looked like in terms of busing kids into more affluent school districts. And I was fortunate to grow up in that school district, and we had kids bussed in for it. And, a lot of people from, my side of the town reacted against it. Inside school, nobody really cared. Outside the school, the communities and the parents cared, right? The kids didn't care.
No, the kids don't even notice whether someone's from what background or not. They don't even see that.
Yeah, unless the parents make it such a huge deal. And, as a governor, are you prepared for the fact that, hey, you know what, we need to rebalance things. So some of your kids are going to go to that school and some of these kids are going to use school.
It's really interesting. This is just a side thing about what we were talking about, but it sort of does smack into the progressive side of things as well. Like in New Zealand, all over New Zealand with the public school system, which is so strong because it's, it's a strong public school system compared to most countries. But they have zoning things. So again, but what they've had is zoning creep, whereby schools keep on trying to get rezoned. And what you do is you get parents moving into a particular area because of the school. And what you get is you get a widening gap between the haves and the haves not. Even though they're public schools, they can ask for donations from their parents. And you think about, you've got a wealthy area where it's getting wealthier because people are moving there specifically for the school, because it's the best school. And, again, define best. Usually the problem is what they've had in the previous government, which were unwinding, they had what they call deciles. And the deciles were essentially a school scoring system based on the socio-economic background of the parents. So what you had is you had parents judging a school based on the wealth of the parents, other parents. And so if it was a decile 9 or 10, you knew it was a wealthy area. And so people were defaulting to, well, that means the school's better. No, it probably just means it's whiter. And then maybe it has more, it has better stuff because it's more backing from the parents, but that's still a minuscule amount compared to the quality of the teaching. And so and they're trying to, the progressive side of politics now, who are in charge in New Zealand, are trying to unwind this, and because it's obviously doesn't align to their values. So again, it's like schools have been living, some schools have been like dining out on this decile thing, and other ones have been suffering. And now they're shifting the policy back to something which is sort of like a little bit less elitist and sort of divisive. And it's going to take a long time to unwind that, and for people not to be looking at that as a scoring system. But again, scoring systems are another system, politically led thing, aren't they? Again, in Australia, I've been hearing from a lot of teachers that it's impossible to teach kids anymore, because all they have to do is it's all about the grades and all the different metrics of like how good our school is, because it's all about comparing schools. Like, how do you choose which school to send your kids to? Well, you compare them all these metrics, all of which are putting the school, the teachers, the governors under massive pressure, especially in the public school system. So it's a minefield for governors, but that's the job, right? It's the job to keep on top of this stuff. And again, I go back to the risk register. Maybe we should do a webinar on risk registers, because the more I talk to organizations, especially time and resource poor ones like schools and nonprofits, they don't really have an active risk register a lot of the time. And maybe we should do one on that.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a great idea. And so now, if I were to sum up basically what we're looking at in terms of this news, is how much time is the board taking out of its schedule, and say it's only 6 meetings a year, and those meetings go anywhere from an hour and a half to like all night long, 5 hours. But where on the agenda item is where on the agenda does it talk about, hey, the risk register, or hey, what's going on in our community or outside of our community politically, or that we need to be mindful of as we begin looking ahead? And how far ahead should we be looking? Or do we have a subcommittee that's focused on that and, monitoring and evaluating the strategic plan and as well as our heads? So that would be something that I would take a look at as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good conclusion.
So, I mean, yeah, and I also kind of I want to bring it back to everything we're talking about and have been talking about, is just being mindful of that balance between management and governance. And just to kind of come back to where this all started for this newscast, is that, let management focus on the big picture and education, and for governance, focus on what's going on and can impact your ability to help management actualize those dreams that they have for their students.
Yeah. And again, I think that's a fantastic conclusion. And just my thing, again, going back to the dynamic between management and board, often boards think that management work for them, but it's actually the reverse. You're there for management because they're the ones operating the school and working directly with the teachers, the kids, and the parents. You're there to essentially, keep the road clear, as it were, I suppose you could call it. Yeah. That's been a great little newscast. Fantastic, Michael. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure. It's great working again with you, Paul, on this one. And I look forward to our next webinar that's going to be in a few weeks, that we're going to be sending out a link for this week. So, perfect. So everybody, have a great day.